It's the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook Podcast, Season 2, Episode 6, featuring Carl Richards. Don't bury the Zinger. Some podcast conversations come along at exactly the right time. When I originally reached out to my guest today, I had no idea that we'd be working from home, avoiding all social contact, and living through an unprecedented time of economic and market upheaval. Carl Richards is well known in the financial planning profession as someone who distills complex concepts into simple messages through his behaviour gap artwork. A certified financial planner, Carl has a powerful message for the financial planner community, never more important than right now. In this conversation, we talk about why this time is different, but also the same, how financial planners can best navigate their clients through the weeks and months ahead, and our shared passion for cold water, and what that means for our ability to deal with the market-related traumas. Here's my conversation with Carl Richards in Season 2, Episode 6 of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook. So, Carl, welcome to the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook podcast. Our audience is financial planners, and you're well known in the financial planner community, particularly here in the UK now, because you're now, for the while anyway, a temporary UK resident. So, welcome to the country. How are you finding the move? How is life in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, aside from the moment we're recording this with everything going on, I have found it amazing. Like I've found, particularly given your audience, right, the planning community in the UK has always been one of my favorite. Even before we moved here, I spent plenty of time working here, and I've always found it very, I joke about this secret society of real financial planners. And I have found the secret society of real financial planners in the UK to be really, really they're real. You know what I mean? Like top notch, top five. It's found the same thing in Australia. There's this small group. There's still maybe a bunch of stuff with the traditional financial services industry that we don't like, right? Like we in all countries. But I've been really impressed with the quality among real planners here. It's been super fun.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a good assessment of the community we have here in the UK, and it took me a while as a financial advisor to discover that community and become a financial planner. And it was the Institute of Financial Planning, I think, which sort of opened my eyes to those people who are here and doing that real work. Sadly, no longer with us, but I think the membership is still alive and kicking. You've probably discovered that.
Yeah, for sure. I remember, in fact, that didn't they? I spoke at an event in Wales at the Celtic Manor.
Celtic Manor, yes, yeah.
Yeah, with Nick and crew.
And that group has never really gone away, despite no longer being with us and falling under a different banner now. It's that community still exists, which is so important. Look, Carl, for those who don't know you, and that's I suspect relatively few of our listeners, but you're known as the sketch guy. You're known for behaviour gap. But how would you sort of describe how you've got to where you are today?
Oh man, yeah, that's quite by accident. The short version of the story is I was in college. I accidentally got into the industry. I applied to be a security guard. It's a long story, but I applied to be a security guard. It turns out it was securities on the ad. Got a job at a big call center, Fidelity Investments, actually, their big call center. Then started getting exposed. I thought I was in a math and a spreadsheet and calculator job. Then I started talking to real people, answering phone calls, and people were nervous, or people were scared, or people were excited, and I started to realize wow, this isn't about spreadsheets and calculators. It's about dreams and hopes and behavior and emotion. And so I just started talking about that to everybody that would listen to me, and then sort of started playing in traffic a bit, putting things up on a little website, and started trying to explain things to clients. I moved on and started my own. I went to work for a big brokerage firm, and it was there where I was trying to explain things to clients, very much like an investment advisor at the time, and trying to explain things to clients and would get blank stares, despite the fact that they were super smart, successful people. So it was my problem, not theirs. And one day, out of an act of desperation, I jumped up and was like, no, like this. And I don't have any art background. This will be obvious by anybody who knows my work. But I was like, no, like this. And I drew some circles and a square and an arrow or something. And they were like, oh, I get it now. And that moment, I was like, wow, I got sort of addicted to that idea of taking really important but complex things and making them a little bit simpler and easier to understand. And I got addicted to the process of diving into something really complicated, and then trying to understand all the nuance, all the different opinions and all the different angles. And then in the middle of all that complexity, I got addicted to the idea of coming out the other side and saying, after all that, this is what matters, right? And obviously you miss some nuance when you do that, but if you've gone through the nuance, the goal is to capture that in an elegantly simple way. So I got addicted to that, started doing that publicly, just on a little website, and nobody was reading it, right? But I just kept doing it. And then one day, through a series, and I mean this honestly, really fortunate events, like luck. Maybe I had increased my luck surface area, but it was still luck that editor at the New York Times found it and liked it and said, "Hey, would you do this for us?" And so I've been writing that column for every week for 10 years now, which is nuts. Wow. And then the books. And so that's kind of how this all happened. I left the big brokerage firm, started my own firm, became a proper financial planner, sold that eventually to just focus on, now I'm totally focused on forcibly inserting my opinion into the world of what real financial planning looks like. So that's kind of I see that as the next 5 to 10 years of my work, is just forcibly inserting that opinion.
What I love about that story in particular is, as you say, no art background, but probably if we were to sort of look at a list of the most successful artists in the world now, you may well rank on it. I mean, commercially at least, because you're known for your drawings, taking that complexity and really injecting simplicity into it. So how do you go? What's your process distilling complexity and coming up with a simple drawing that captures that very complex process, that complex thinking?
Yeah, Martin, thanks for asking that. It's my favorite subject, and I don't ever get to talk about it. I do some consulting work that allows me to talk about, which is great. But I think, look, here's the practical application for those of you listening. One of the emails I get the most from the people out there that are looking for your services, or looking for a financial planner, or looking for help making smarter decisions about money. One of the emails I get most often is, "Will you please tell them to make things more simple? Stop using all these words. I don't understand." It doesn't help when we use the word risk and somebody gets a slightly confused look, and we say, "Oh, sorry, standard deviation." that doesn't help. So here's the practical application of this answer to this question, right? Take everything. So here's what I do, right? I think okay, there's a problem. And often early on, it was I'm getting asked this question a bunch, right? The phone's ringing, I'm getting asked. And this would be really helpful in any moment of scariness, right? Scary markets, also greedy markets too. But anytime people are tempted to do something crazy with their money, you're probably getting this question a couple times. And I started noticing after I didn't realize I was doing this till looking back, but after I would hear the same question twice, I would think, okay, how am I answering that, right? So you got a problem, you want to solve the problem. So then I dive in, and if I've done a lot of drawing on the radio. So if you would imagine a line for a minute, and maybe even if you're listening and you want to, and you're not driving, take out a piece of paper and just draw a line straight across the paper. And then in the middle of the paper, let it get make it like a ball of yarn, right? Just all swirly and squiggly. And so you got this problem, you dive into it, and that's where you start trying to understand the nuance. And what about this? What about this edge case? And what about this exception? And you read, study. Then you try to write the answer to that problem, right? Write or speak the answer to that problem. Once you've written the answer to that problem, I think you then go back, and this is maybe the real practical piece for the good financial planners that listen to this, is take every educational piece you have right now. Just take one. What's the flagship brochure, educational piece, or white paper that you give out the most, and go through it. And we literally do this. We go through and take out words and sentences and see if we lost the meaning. So we literally would remove things. What if we take that out? I would start with all numbers, right? Because as soon as you have numbers on a piece of paper, people want to argue about the data and they miss the point. So here, number one, try this exercise. If somebody read that piece that you wrote, that educational piece, your book, the talk you're going to give, and afterwards you had a survey and you said, and I do this, I'm giving a keynote and I pretend 300 people are there. If all 300 people left and they were asked afterwards, what's the one thing you remember from Carl's talk? what would you want that to be? What's the one thing they would take away from that page that you wrote? One thing. So I think you get one. And then you take that one thing and you say, okay, everything in this, every word has to support that. We call that the zinger. In like, in newspaper parlance, you would call that the lead. Yep. And there's this old saying, like, don't bury the lead, right? So I would go through and look at what supports it. And then the other thing that's really interesting, and I have to do this a lot because of the nature of the work, is anything that's a distraction, right? I'll give you an example. Gender, right? The use of his money or her kitchen, right? Like I said, her kitchen one time. I'm not scared of having controversial opinions, but if they distract from the point, remove them, right? So that's some examples. Data and numbers generally cause people to want to argue about, like, oh, is that big or that big or that big? They miss the point. And then other distractions, political distractions, religious distractions. And again, I'm not shying away from those discussions. I'm just saying it's not serving the point. Yeah. Right. So, and my last thing I'll say is follow this. There's a great quote saying, I can't remember, I think it's in The Little Prince, where perfection is not achieved when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away.
That's spot on. I mean, I love the point Nelson made about burying the lead. And I think in a way, I look at that and think it's exactly what my kids do when they come home from school and I ask them how their day was. And they'll tell me about their day and then just casually throw in, oh yeah, and somebody came and brought a pet crocodile to show us. And it's about what's the most important part of the story. And then everything else, as you say, supporting it. So thinking of that first, putting that in front of everything.
Yeah, and I even think, like, we often start, and I get all confused about this. I'll write things, we'll write them, and they're like, it's not feeling well. And then we'll figure out what the zinger, we call it internally, the zinger is. And we just will go, whoop, and move that to the first sentence. Yeah. Like, start with it. Let me tell you the punchline before we get started. My goal today is to, boom, convince you of this. Okay, great, here we go. Boom, 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 right? So anyway, hopefully that's helpful.
No, absolutely. I think if people take one thing away from this conversation, hopefully it is the zinger, and we'll title the podcast that as well to get some attention from it. Now, we're living through fairly unprecedented times right now, or is it? I think if we can have a conversation around that, we hear a lot of financial planners say, this is just part of a normal market cycle. We get peaks, we get troughs. It feels different now, doesn't it? It feels different because we're seeing recession looming, we're seeing a market correction, and we're seeing a global pandemic and being locked in our homes. So is it rational for us to just look back at history and say history will repeat and will come on again?
That's a really, really big question. So I think there's a couple of things, and I should be clear, like, I'm often wrong, but never in doubt. Right. So like but I don't have a problem having an opinion about this one because I think a lot about it. So the first thing I think that's really important about this, and particularly how we communicate it to the public, is I think you've got to start with empathy. So my process for dealing with scary markets is ESPA. So empathy, space, plan, action. And I think we often forget the empathy part. We think, like, oh, just spray them with facts and figures. Don't you know if you miss the 10 best days of the market, or don't you know the average thing or the average this? Nobody wants it. Have you ever tried telling somebody to stop smoking? Like, have you ever tried giving somebody facts about lung cancer while they have a cigarette in their mouth? Right? It doesn't work. Like, try reasoning or lecturing a teenager when they're in the middle of making an irrational choice. Doesn't work. What they want first is an air hug now, like an air hug, not like a meter away hug. But so let's start there. Is this time different? Absolutely, it's different. But hang with me here. Here's what they're all different. I think the thing we forget is when we're saying this time is no different, like the last 4 words of any great investor is this time is different. That saying is referring to the end. They all end is what that saying is referring to. Like, they all end. So far, they've all ended, right? It's not the beginning. So we need to recognize that this time is so was 2008. It was unprecedented, right? Like, and so it's just different enough that you feel like it's completely different. And it's rational and normal and reasonable and human to say, this is so different that it may end different. And we've got to be empathetic for that conversation. Like, yeah, I understand it's scary, right? But then we have to shift into, okay, we've given space, we've had our hugs, we've cried together, whatever we need to do there. I realize it's scary. We've had empathy. We've created a little bit of space for a conversation now. We've gotten out of fight or flight mode. And now we get to go back to the plan, the P in the ESPA, the plan, right? And at that point, we just have to decide, like, are we going to rely on the weighty evidence of history or not? And I don't know that it's right, but I just know that I don't have anything better to do right now. You know, like Churchill's old quote that democracy is the worst form of government ever created by the mind of man, except for all the others.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, I think this is the worst way to behave with our financial plans ever created, except for all the others. And the reason it's the worst way is it can't deliver certainty. None of us can look anybody in the eyes right now and say, this absolutely will end. We can be rationally overconfident, is what I'm calling it. Rationally overconfident, in the sense that the job of a real financial planner is to help people make incredibly important decisions in the face of irreducible uncertainty. Right? There's no way to get rid of that uncertainty. And the uncertainty is, this time might be, I don't think it will be, okay, this time might be different. But the question would be, what percentage of the time has that statement been true in our 95 years of equity market history? 0. So do I want to bet against those odds? And of course, a financial plan should, and there's so much good work being done on this kind of stuff here in the UK. I mean, I think like the work Abraham's doing, and the financial plan that you built included all the weighted evidence of history, right? It included markets going up and down. It included 87, it included 73, 74, it included the Great Depression, it included 2008. Those things are in the plan. We've projected those going forward. We've included those in the plan. To a large degree, we planned for markets like this. Now, we didn't plan for the reason it happened, but we planned for markets like this.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm starting to hear some financial planners already talking about, because this is so different in terms of the economic response to it, the central bank monetary policy and easing, government intervention. So some financial planners out there are already talking about how investment models will need to change in the future dramatically. Is it too soon? we're still in the middle of this, surely.
Yeah, my thinking is that may actually be true, that investment models may need to change, that even based on like what we did, I feel like we're doing something like we did in 2008, which is sort of like, instead of taking really hard medicine that might be too hard for all of us to handle. And I'm not arguing that would be a good idea. I'm just saying, instead of doing that, we're adding more life support to a system. And is that system sustainable long term? Look, I don't know. I mean, it worries me that it's unsustainable long term, and that if we fix this, but the powers that be are going to keep the system going right now. And so what do you, I don't know. So yeah, I think it is unprecedented, but I do think your point, is it too soon to make that decision? Like, what do you do? Do you pull out of the whole system and move to the hills? Like, and maybe you do, but what's your alternative? The alternative is always historically the guns and butter portfolio, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And what percentage of the time has the guns and butter portfolio been the right one? 0.
You're doing plenty of Zoom calls with financial planners at the moment, I know, and almost like a group therapy type session in some cases. So
yeah.
What are some of the concerns that they're putting forward? What are their clients saying to them right now? What are they worried about?
One is the tradition that we always face when markets get scary, and that is like, one is when your job is to help people stay the course, like stick to the plan. That's what I think of it as. Like, okay, and we all know how to do that. It's hard, and it might be harder now than it's ever been, but way harder. And we're seeing way more of this time than any time before, is when the plan's blown up. And what I mean by that is that where like you built a really plan, and suddenly that long-term money is going to be needed for short-term emergencies. And you think all the business owners just couldn't have even thought of like the idea that this was just going to turn off. You think about all the restaurant folks you've got. So how do you guide? That's the biggest concern right now is and the way I think about this is, one, is kind of a defender of a map. We've gotten I don't know that, I mean, the real planners have gotten relatively good at that, right? And there's a lot of them. But the other is you're suddenly in a new job. And the new job is, you've always had this job. I've been claiming this is your job from the beginning, but we're getting at it now. You're suddenly a guide in a changing landscape. And when you're a guide in a changing landscape, I've done some, I've spent plenty of time in rivers and in mountains and guiding and being guided. And when you're a guide in a changing landscape, you have to acknowledge the uncertainty and realize, like, I don't know what's going to be over the next mountain pass. Like the last 11 mountain passes we've gone over, there's been a lake there. But I don't know if there will be one over the 12th. But we've got these tools in the backpack. Like, we'll sort it out. So now we're looking clients in the eyes and saying, I don't know. And sometimes there's a sense, this is what I'm hearing from a lot of planners right now, is like, there's a sense that you failed them because the plan blew up. And that's where the defender thing comes in. And I think we need to let go of that defense and go, look, that wasn't your job is not to defend an outdated map. Your job now is to look somebody in the eyes and go, listen, brother, I don't know if there will be a lake over this mountain pass, but you and I are going to sort this out together, right? Like, here's how you do it. Assess the situation, assess where you are now. And this is all from both military science and complexity research. You assess the situation you're at now, guess at the next best step, and make it a micro step. Like, we do this in micro actions. You make a guess, and I'm using that word intentionally. And you should be a really good guesser, but you guess at the next best step, and then you reset and reassess, and you repeat that. And you may be doing that with some clients. You may be having that every day. Like, let's have a daily briefing, man. I'm going to help you through this. Like, let's call the bank. Let's see what we can do. Like, whatever. Like, and that is the urgency around that and the volume of that is a new place to be. And it's demanding, when you have to be kind of the release valve for everybody else's uncertainty. It's demanding something of people that we might not be up to. Some of us aren't up to the task, right?
And it's demanding something of financial planners at a time when they're worried about their own businesses, their own families. They're often working from home instead of from offices, so their whole life has been gone through this upheaval. So it's a lot to ask, isn't it?
It's crazy. It's the job, though, and I just think, like, I'm sort of just begging the people that listen to this, because they're all real planners. Like, please, like, you can do this. Right? Like, you can do this. And yeah, you may, and you're totally entitled to, like, have those moments, like, get in the bed, throw the sheets over your head. Right? I like to go outside and throw things like big rocks or whatever, like get in some cold water if you can find it, cry, go in the garage and do your push-ups. Maybe on the other end, if it's sun salutations and yoga for you, like, do those things, be weak, feel all of that. Maybe every day, maybe a couple times a day, feel all those feelings. Don't, because you can't suppress them. Like, feel all that, and then show up again for those people that need you, for yourself, for your own family, and be the leader that says, look, you're coming with me. We're going this way. I don't know that it's the right way, but it's the only thing we got. Let's make a step and move forward. It's about being less wrong right now each day than being right.
I've got to take you back to cold water, because that's a passion that you and I both share. Although I do it with a wetsuit on, I know you just jumping in straight in your trunks, don't you? But what makes cold water such a good sort of solution, good therapy in this time?
So I think we have to be careful here to pay attention to, because the way I got through 2008 and 2009 was to exercise really hard. For some people, that's a good idea. But what I found was it was just making I was only feeling better when I was on my bike, like trying to crush my buddies, right? Like, it was Tuesday morning World Cup every day.
Yeah.
And what was happening was the peaks would get lower and the valleys were getting lower. So the way I like to think about it is it was stress. I mean, that's stress.
Yeah.
And if you add what the personal stress And I was just digging myself a hole. So in 2010, 11, I was a broken human. Like, to a large degree, that's why we moved to New Zealand, was my wife was smart enough to see it and pull the plug. And so I would suggest maybe finding some things that allow you to relieve stress that are down regulating instead of up regulating. So they allow you to relieve stress by removing stress instead of allow you to relieve stress by adding stress. That may be age related, and it may also be like just the physical shape you're in related. I don't know, but just pay attention to yourself. But for me, I used to use cold water to upregulate.
Right.
It was like a substitute for caffeine. Like, yeah. Now I use upregulate water to downregulate. So when I get in, and I'm not swimming, I'm just getting in for 3 minutes, right? So, or in the shower for 3 minutes, like full cold.
Yep.
And the goal is, and there's plenty of research around this, like just type, I think it's cold thermogenesis, like if you want to understand some of the research around it, or just benefits of cold showers. For me, what I do is I have a breath pattern before, and then I get in the cold water and try and maintain that breath pattern. And the breath pattern is down, it's calm. It's not like I used to do that, like, yeah. Now I'm doing calm. And then when I get in the cold water, if I can keep that pattern, what I'm training my body to do is say, even with a massive external shock, I can stay calm.
Yep.
That's why I'm doing it. And it's finally starting to work. Like the other day I noticed, like, my daughter said something to me that could have been hijacking, right? Like could have been, and in the past would have generated a response. Like, I don't think she was wrong, so I don't even know what it was, but she said something, and I noticed, like, oh, that's just cold water, right? You can respond calmly. So that's why I'm using cold water. And I think there's a lot of confusion around that because people think like, oh, I feel great. Yeah. And that's great. I'm using it for the opposite effect right now.
That's fascinating. And of course, you can draw a parallel between that approach and when markets give us a shock, or when any event gives us a shock externally. If we've trained our bodies and our minds to cope with that, and as you say, to maintain our response and maintain our reaction, we're in such a better position.
Yeah, I mean, that's the entire, like, if you want to do something other than cold water, like just try 10 minutes of meditation a day, right? So you just like meditation, a walk, like anything where you are aware of the state you're in and you're aware of the changes to that state. Because I think what happens to most of us is we aren't even aware that we're reacting. The space between stimulus and response is non-existent.
Yeah.
Stimulus, response, scary markets, and it's like a low grade. Right now it's a high grade, but it's sort of like a low grade headache. And if you stop and go, wait, I have a headache, maybe I need to, whatever you do to get rid of it, drink some water. Like if we stop and notice, I think it's the looping that's hurting us right now. We're looping for clients, we're looping for our own businesses. So if we can get some of that out of our head and go, wait, I'm looping. I've already made that decision.
Yeah.
I've already decided that this is my investment process. I've even decided how I'm going to explain it to people. And I've even decided what information would warrant me rethinking about it. Like that's what I do on a piece of paper. Here's the decision. Here's how I made the decision. And here's what would warrant me reassessing the decision. And then when I start to loop on that again, I can pull out that paper and go, oh, wait, I've already done that. And if I was a planner right now, I would do that for every client. I would just pull out a piece of paper with every client and write down, here's where we are. Here's the decision. Okay, stay the course or call the bank or whatever. Here's new information that may become available that would warrant a reassessment. Then when that client pops into your head, you can just grab it and go, oh yeah, right?
Yep, spot on. Carl, it's always a pleasure to chat to you. Before I let you go, you've got to tell us about the fellowship. So it has a slightly mysterious aura to it. It's invitation only, I know. So what's it all about?
Am I allowed to tell you?
only if you want to.
No, I'm just kidding. It's really fun. We built it that way on purpose. That's hence the dragons. The dragons have done really well in Wales. I figured out lately. But the fellowship is all about mindset, confidence, and your value. I just noticed we built all these really tactical workshops for planners, and they loved them. Right. And they'd pay a lot of money for them. And then I noticed they would tell us how valuable they were, but I would notice they weren't doing them. And I realized the biggest problem for all of us, and this isn't just a financial planner problem, by the way, it's just a human problem. Tactics are easy. Like, to find out how to do something, there's like, you're a Google search away. Tactics are easy. Confidence is hard. And it's funny, I didn't build it. So it's a 23-day program, all delivered online. I show up every day, 23 days in your inbox, basically waving a big flag, reminding you of the value you bring to the world around very specific topics. There's 21 declarations of a real financial planner. And each day there's an intro day and then 21 declarations and then a conclusion. That's why it's 23 days. And I show up every morning to wave a big flag, but it's not tactical. It's about confidence. And I didn't build it with this time in mind, but it's perfectly suited for right now, because what you need more than anything right now as a planner is a reminder every day of the value you're offering, because it's so easy to get crushed. So that's what it is. And yeah, to get an invitation, it's not hard to get an invitation. You go to the societyofadvice.com, societyofadvice.com, you can get an invite there. And then the rest is a mystery, which you have to yes. You have to enter your email to find out the rest.
Yeah, we'll put a link in the show notes so our listeners can find that nice and easily. Carl, it's been a pleasure to chat as always. Stay safe. Keep yourself, keep doing the great work you're doing, because you add so much value to the community. And we're just delighted to have you here in the UK for the time you're here now. It's already making a big difference.
Martin, thank you. And let me just mention to you, you don't have to be doing this right now. So thanks for the work you're doing. It's generous beyond anybody's expectations. So I really appreciate it. We need more people doing this kind of work so people can go, oh, that's what financial planning is. Oh, because it's a little bit like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. They said we don't know, but we know it when we see it. Yes. That's a little bit how financial planning works. Like, we can't really describe it. We can't really use words like "you can trust me" or "I'm real," or because they've all been co-opted. So the work you're doing by allowing people to see it, like hear it, feel it a bit, is super generous. So thank you.
Thank you, Carl. A big thank you to Carl for joining us on the podcast today. I hope that conversation brought you some comfort, some solace during these difficult times. I've got to say, personally, I've been finding the past few weeks incredibly testing. Just the upheaval and being taken out of my normal everyday routine, moving from our office to the home to work from here, not being in close, regular contact with my team on a face-to-face basis, and of course, seeing the difficulties so many people are going through within the financial planner community, but also in the local business community. And people's lives in general just feeling really uncertain. But Carl has such a strong and powerful message for us all in that conversation. As I said in the intro, it just came along at exactly the right time for me, and I hope for you as well. So a big thank you to Carl for sharing that with us. You can find useful links and all the show notes, including a full episode transcription, at bamfordmedia.co.uk. Go and check that out. And until next time, thank you for listening. I hope you're staying safe and staying home. And we'll be back shortly with a new episode of the Financial Planner Marketing Playbook.